In judging Mr. Samuel Dockrath by appearance only, and not by the ear, one would be inclined to doubt that he could be a very sharp attorney abroad, and a very persistent tyrant at home.
But when Mr. Dockrath began to talk, one's respect for him began to grow.
He talked well and to the point, and with a tone of voice that could command where command was possible, persuade where persuasion was required, mystify where mystification was needed, and express with accuracy the tone of an obedient humble servant when civility was so often thought to be expedient.
And now we will accompany him on his little tour into Yorkshire.
Groby Park is about 7 miles from Leeds, and as Mr. Dockrath had in the first instance to travel from Hamworth up to London, he did not reach Leeds until late in the evening.
It was a nasty, cold and drizzling night, and the beauties and marvels of the large manufacturing town offered him no attraction, and at 9 o'clock he had seated himself in front of the fire in the commercial room at the Bull, had called for a pair of public slippers, and was about to solace all his cares with a glass of mahogany-coloured brandy and water.
The room had no occupant but himself, and therefore he was able to make the most of all its comforts.
He had taken a solitary armchair, and so placed it that the gas fell direct from behind his head onto that day's Leeds and Halifax Chronicle, as soon as he should choose to devote himself to local politics.
The waiter had looked at him with doubtful eyes when he'd asked to be shown into the commercial room, feeling all but certain that such a guest had no right to be there.
He carried no bulky bundles of samples, nor any of those outward characteristics of a commercial gent, with which all men conversant with the rail and road are acquainted, and with which the accustomed eye of a waiter recognises at a glance.
And here we might be as well to explain that the ordinary traveller in this respect is badly treated by the customs of England, or rather by its hotel keepers.
All innkeepers have commercial rooms, as certainly as they have bars and taps. But not all of them have commercial rooms in the properly exclusive sense.
A stranger, therefore, who was asked for and obtained his mutton chop in the commercial room, the Dolphin, the George, and the Bear, not unnaturally asked to be shown into the same chamber at the King's Head.
The King's Head does a business with real commercials, and so the stranger finds himself out of his element.
show, sir? Didn't you hear me say so?
Mr. Dockrath had arrived by the 8 to 22 p.m. down, but the 8:45 p.m. up from the north had followed quick upon its heels, and he had hardly put his brandy and water to his lips when a rush and a sound of many voices was heard from the hall.
There is a great difference between the entrance into an inn of men who are not known there and of men who are known.
The men who are not known are shy, diffident and doubtful, and anxious to propitiate the chambermaid by great courtesy.
The men who are known are loud, jocular and assured, or else in case of deficient accommodation, loud, angry and full of threats.
The guests who had now arrived were well known and seemed at present to be in the former mood.
Well, Mary, what's the time of day with you?
Much about the old tune, Mr. Moulder? Now look alive and keep moving up there. Will you have them boxes upstairs, Mr. Cantwise?
Mr. Dockrath resolved to stand upon his rights, so he did not move the chair, but rather looked up over his shoulder at the newcomers.
The first man who entered was short and very fat. So fat that he could not have seen his own knees for some considerable time past. His face rolled with fat, as also did all his limbs. His eyes were large and bloodshot. He wore no beard, so therefore showed plainly the triple bagging of his fat chin.
Despite his overwhelming fatness, there was something in his face that was masterful, almost vicious. His body had been overcome by eating, but not as yet his spirit, one would be inclined to say.
This was Mr. Moulder, well known on the road as being in the grocery and spirit line, a pushing man who understood his business and was well trusted by his firm in spite of his habitual intemperance.
I mean, what did the firm care whether or no he killed himself through eating and drinking?
He sold his goods, collected his money, and made his remittances. If he got drunk at night, that was nothing to them, seeing as he always did his quota of work the next day.
But Mr. Moulder did not get drunk. His brandy and water went into his blood, and into his feet, and into his eyes, and into his hands.
But not into his brain.
The other was a little square man in the hardware line of the name of Cantwise. He disposed of fire irons, grates, kettles, and ovens, and was at present moment heavily engaged in the sale of certain newly invented metallic tables and chairs, lately brought out by the Patent Steel Furniture Company, for which Mr. Cantwise did business.
He looked as though a skin, rather too small for its purpose, had been drawn over his head, so that his forehead, cheeks and chin were tight and shining. His eyes were small and green, and were always moving about in his head, and were seldom used by Mr. Cantwise in the ordinary way.
And whatever he looked sideways. It was not that he did not look you in the face, but he always looked at you with a sidelong glance, never choosing to have you straight in front of him.
And the more eager he was in conversation, the more anxious he might be to gain his point, the more he averted his head and looked askance, so that sometimes he would almost prefer to have his antagonist right over his shoulder.
And then, as he did this, he would thrust forward his chin, and having looked at you round the corner until his eyes were nearly out of his head, he would close them both, sucking his lips, and shake his head with rapid little movements, as though he was saying to himself,
"Ah, sir, you're a bad one, a very bad one."
That Mr. Moulder did a firm good business, doing tea, coffee and British brandy on a well-established basis of capital and profit. The travelling commercial world in the north of England was well aware.
No one entertained any doubt about his employers, Hubbles in Greece of Houndsditch. Hubbles in Greece had done all right, as they had for these last 20 years. But I cannot say that there was quite so strong a feeling of confidence felt in the Patent Steel Furniture Company generally, or in the individual operations of Mr. Cantwise in particular.
The world in Yorkshire and Lancashire were doubtful about metallic tables, and it was thought Mr. Cantwise too eloquent in their praise.
Who's the party, James?
Gentleman by the 822, down.
Commercial?
Says so himself. Anyways.
Gammon.
Now, Mr. Mulder began to be angry, for he was a stickler for the privileges and customs of his class, and he had an idea that the world was not as conservative in that approach as it should be.
But Mr. Dockrath, however, was not to be frightened, so he drew his chair a thought nearer to the fire, took a sup of brandy and water, and prepared himself for war if war should be necessary.
Cold evening, sir. What time of year?
In spite of his terrible burden of flesh, Mr. Mulder could look angry on occasion, but he could only do so when he was angry. He was not gifted with the command of the facial muscles.
Yes. Yes, it is coldish. Waiter, bring me a cigar.
This was very provoking, as must be confessed.
Mr. Mulder had not been prepared to take any steps towards turning the gentleman out, though doubtless he might have done so if he'd chosen to exercise his prerogative.
But he did expect that the gentleman would acknowledge the weakness of his footing by moving his chair a little to one side of the fire, and he did not expect that he would presume to smoke without first asking whether the practice was held to be objectionable by the legal possessors of the room.
But Mr. Dockrath was free of any such pusillanimity.
Waiter, bring me a cigar, do you hear?
The great heart of Mulder could not stand this unmoved.
He had been an accustomed visitor to the room for 15 years and had always done his best to uphold the commercial code unsullied. He was so well known that no one else would have presumed to take the chair at the 4 o'clock commercial dinner if he were present.
It was incumbent on him to stand forward and make a fight, especially in the presence of Cantwise, who was by no means stanch to his order.
Cantwise would have been glad to have outsiders in the room in order that he might puff his tables and, if possible, effect a sale. A mode of proceeding held with great aversion by the upright, old-fashioned commercial mind.
Sir, I and this gentleman are going to have some supper, and it ain't a custom to smoke in commercial rooms during meals. You know the rules if you're commercial yourself, I suppose, as I suppose you are, seeing you in this room.
Now, Mr. Mulder was wrong in this law, as he himself was very much aware.
Smoking is allowed in all commercial rooms once the dinner's been an hour or so off the table.
And then it was necessary that he should hit the stranger in some way, and chances were the stranger himself knew nothing about commercial law.
But Mr. Cantwise knew the laws well enough, and as he saw before him a potential purchaser of metallic tables, he came to the assistance of the attorney.
I think you're a bit wrong there, Mr.
Wrong
Mulder.
about what?
Well, as to smoking, it's 9 o'clock, and if the gentleman would like to
I
smoke
don't
in
give a
this...
brass farthing about the clock. But when I'm going to have a bit of steak with me tea in my own room, I chooses to have it comfortable.
Goodness me, Mr. Mulder. How many times have I seen you sitting there with a pipe in your mouth with half a dozen gents?
Follow your
presenting-
rules.
It was you spoke of them.
The question I take to be this. Has this gentleman any right at all to be in this room, or has he not? Is he commercial, or is he miscellaneous? That's the chat as I take.
You're on the square there, I must allow.
James! James! Is that gentleman commercial, or is he not?
Sir, I think you'll find it extremely difficult to define that word. In this enterprising country, all gentlemen are more or less commercial.
Hear, hear.
Waiter, is this gentleman commercial, or is he not? Because if not, then I'll trouble you to send for Mr. Crump. My compliments to Mr. Crump, and I wish to see him here.
Now, Mr. Crump was the landlord of the Bull Inn.
Master just stepped out, down the street.
Why don't you answer my question, sir?
The gent said as how he was Marshal. Was I to go to contradict the gent and tell him that he wasn't, when he said as how he was?
If you please, we will not bring the waiter into this discussion. I asked for the commercial room, and he did his duty by showing me to the door of it. The fact I take to be this. in the south of England, where the rules to which you refer are not so strictly kept as in these more mercantile localities.
I've always observed that.
I travelled for 3 years in Devonshire, Somersetshire and Wiltshire, and the commercial rooms are as well kept there as any I ever see.
I alluded to Surrey and Kent.
They're uncommonly miscellaneous in Surrey and Kent. There's no doubt in the world about that.
If the gentleman means to say that he's come into this room because he didn't know the custom of the country, then I, for one, have no more to say, of course. But if that's the case, then I, for one, shall be happy to welcome the gentleman to make himself comfortable in this room as a stranger and, I may say, as a guest. Paying his own shot, of course.
And as for me, I shall be delighted. I never did like too much exclusiveness. What's the use of bottling oneself up? That's what I always say. Besides, there's no charity in it. We gents, as are always on the road, should show a little charity to them as ain't so well accustomed to the work.
To this allusion to charity, Mr. Mulder snuffled through his nose to show his great disgust, but made no further answer.
Mr. Dockrath, who was determined not to yield, but had nothing to gain by further fighting, bowed his head and declared he felt very much obliged.
Whether or no there was any touch of irony in his tone, Mr. Mulder's ears were not fine enough to discover this.
So they now all sat round the fire together, with the attorney still keeping his seat in the middle. And then Mr. Mulder ordered his little bit of steak with his tea.
With the gravy on it, James, and a little bit of fat, and some slices of onion, put on thin, mind, and raw, don't want all the taste fried out of it, and tell the cook that if she don't know to do it as it should be done, I'll be down into the kitchen and do it myself. You'll join me, Cantwise, eh?
Well, I think not. I dined at 3, you know.
Dined at 3? What of that? A dinner at 3 won't last the man forever. You might as well join me.
No, I think not. Have you got such a thing as a nice red herring in the house, James?
Get one round the corner, sir.
Stu, there's a good fella, and I'll take it for a relish with my tea. I'm not too fond of your solids 3 times a day. They heat the blood too much.
And then they went to their evening meal, over which we shall not disturb them.
The steak, we may presume, was cooked aright, as Mr. Mulder did not visit the kitchen, and Mr. Cantwise, no doubt, made great play of his unsubstantial dainty, as he made no further sound until the meal was completely finished.
Did you ever hear anything of that Mr. Mason who lives near Bradford?
I knew his father when I were a boy. Mason and Martop, down in the old Jewry. Very good people they were too.
He's decently well off now, I suppose, isn't he?
I suppose he is. That place up there by the roadside's all his, I take it. Have you been at him with your rusty, rickety tables and chairs?
Goodness me, Mr. Mulder. You're forgetting that there's a gentleman here who won't understand that you're at your jokes. I was doing business at Groby Park, but I found the party uncommon hard to deal with.
Didn't complete the transaction?
Well, no, not exactly. But I intend to call again. He's close enough himself, is Mr. Mason. But his lady, Mrs. M. Lord love you, Mr. Mulder. That there is a woman.
She is she? Well, as for me, I'll have none of these private dealings. It don't suit my book at all, nor it ain't what I've been accustomed to. If a man's wholesale, let him be wholesale.
Very old-fashioned, Mr. Mulder.
Maybe, but none the worse for that. All that, I call it hawking and peddling. All that going around the country with your goods on your back. It ain't trade.
And then there was a lull in conversation, and Mr. Campwise, who was a very religious gentleman, having closed his eyes and been occupied with some internal anathema against Mr. Mulder.
Begging your pardon, sir, but I think you were speaking about a Mr. Mason who lives in these parts.
Exactly, sir. Joseph Mason, Esquire of Groby Park.
I suppose I would be likely to find him at home tomorrow afternoon, if I called.
Certainly, sir, certainly. Leastwise, I should say so. Any personal acquaintance with Mr. Mason, sir? If so, I meant nothing offensive by my allusion to the lady. Nothing at all, I can assure you.
The lady's nothing to me, nor the gentleman either, only that I have a little business with him.
Shall be very happy to join you in the gig, sir, tomorrow as far as Groby Park. Or fly, if more convenient. I shall only take a few patterns with me, and they're no weight at all, none in the least, I can assure you. They go on behind, sir, and you wouldn't know it at all.
To this, Mr. Dockrath would not assent. As he wanted to see Mr. Mason very specially, he should go early and prefer going by himself.
No offence, I hope.
Not in the least.
And if you would permit me, sir, to have the pleasure of showing you a few of my patterns, I'm sure I should be delighted. I think, sir, I could show you an article or two that would please you very much. You see, sir, that new ideas are coming in every day, and wood, sir, is altogether going out as regards furniture. In another 20 years, sir, there won't be such a thing as a wooden table in the country, except with some poor person that can't afford to refurnish. Believe me, sir, iron's the thing nowadays.
And Indian rubber.
Yes, well, Indian rubber's good. Are you in that line, sir?
Well, no, I'm not really.
It's not like iron, sir. You can't make a dinner table for 14 people out of Indian rubber that will shut up into a box 3 by 6 by 2 by 4 deep and 2 by 6 broad. Why, sir, I could let you have a set of drawing room furniture for 15.10 that you've never seen equal in wood for 3 times the money, all ornamented in the tastiest way, sir, and fit for any lady's drawing room or boudoir. The ladies of quality will all get them out for their boudoirs. There's 3 tables, 8 chairs, easy rocking chair, music stand, stool to match, pair of stand-up screens, all gilt in real Louis XIV, and it goes in 3 boxes, 2 by 4 by 2 by 1 and 2 by 3. Think of that, sir, for 15.10 and the box is in. If ready money, the carriage paid.
Well, I'm afraid they're not really in my line.
It's the tastiest present for a gentleman to make to his lady that has come out since those sort of things have come out at all. You'll let me show you the article, sir. It will give me the sincerest pleasure.
And then Mr. Catwise proposed to leave the room so that he might introduce the 3 boxes in question.
No, they wouldn't be in my way at all.
The trouble would be nothing, sir, and it gives me the sincerest pleasure to make them known when I find anyone who would appreciate such undoubted luxuries.
Meanwhile, Mr. Mulder snored heavily, his head falling on his breast every now and again.
Mr. Campwise skipped about the room with wonderful agility, unfastening the boxes and emptying the contents, while Joe the Boots and James the waiter stood by assisting.
They had never yet seen the glories of these chairs and tables, and therefore were not unwilling to be present.
It was singular to see how ready Mr. Campwise was about the work, how recklessly he threw aside the whitey brown paper in which the various pieces of painted iron were enveloped. And with what a practised hand he put together one article after another.
At first there was a round loo table, not quite as large in its circumference as some people might think desirable, but nevertheless a round loo table.
The pedestal and 3 claws were all together. With a knowing touch, Mr. Campwise separated the bottom of what looked like a yellow stick, and lo! There were the 3 legs, which he placed carefully on the ground. On top of this was screwed a small bar, and over the bar was screwed the leaf, or table itself, which consisted of 3 pieces, unfolding, with
These,
hinges.
when the screw had been duly fastened in the centre, opened up upon the bar, and there was the table complete.
It was certainly a tasty article, and the pride in which Mr. Campwise glanced back at it was really quite delightful.
The top of the table was blue, with the red bird of paradise in the middle. The edges, to the breadth of a couple of inches, was yellow. The pillar was also yellow, as were the 3 legs.
It's the real Louis XIV.
Then Mr. Cantwise came out with table number 2, which was, as he described it, a chess, having the proper number of blue and light pink squares marked upon it. These, too, had been made Louis XIVs, with reference to their yellow legs and edges.
The third was a sofa of proper size, but rather small in shape.
And then he brought forth and screwed up the stools, sundry screens and chairs, and within a quarter of an hour the whole set was put up complete.
The red bird of paradise and blue ground appeared on all, as did the yellow legs and edges, which gave them their peculiarly fashionable character.
There! I don't mind giving you a personal guarantee, sir, that there's nothing equal to that for the money, either in England or in France.
They are very nice.
When a man has had produced before him for his own and sole delectation any article or articles, how can he avoid eulogium?
I mean, Mr. Dockrath found himself obliged to pause, and was afraid he might find himself obliged to buy.
Nice! I should rather think they are. And for 15.10 delivered, boxes included. There's nothing like iron, sir. You may take my word for that. They're so strong. Look here, sir.
Good Lord.
Look at that for strength. I don't think any lady of your acquaintance would allow you to stand on her rosewood or mahogany loo table, and if she did, you would not like to adventure it yourself. But look at this for strength.
So, you got your iron traps out, have you? You're there, are you? Upon my word, I'd sooner you than me.
I certainly should not like to see you up here, Mr. Mulder. I doubt whether even this table would bear 25 stone. Joe, lend me a shoulder, there's a good fellow.
Now that's what I call gammon.
What is gammon, Mr. Mulder?
It's all gammon. The chairs and tables is gammon, and so is the stools and the screens.
Mr. Mulder, I didn't call your tea and your brandy and your coffee gammon.
You can't, and it wouldn't do any harm if you did. Ubbles and Grease are too well known in Yorkshire for you to hurt them. But as for all that show-off and gimcrack work, I'll tell you fairly, it ain't what I call trade, and it ain't fit for a commercial room. It's gammon, gammon, gammon. James, give me a bed candle.
Well, I think I'll go too.
You let me put you at the set, eh?
Well, I'll think about it. I just won't give you an answer tonight. Much obliged to you. Good night. Good night.